Talk, music, get it all.
24 hours.
On West Africa Democracy Radio. 94.9 FM Dakar.
WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and Banjul, 1 p.m. in Cotonou. Good afternoon and thank you for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM. This is Newslink. Let's begin with the headline stories. Senegal holds consultation for national dialogue on key national issues in the country. Ebola death toll hits 100 in DR Congo as authorities seek global support to contain the outbreak.
We
need international aid. The virus affects us all.
Nigeria busts a major international drug trafficking network and recovers over $3 million worth of illicit substances.
Another tactical team closed in on the mastermind's luxury fortress at number 8 Dakar Balewa Street, the residence of the drug baron.
In Guinea, electoral campaigns intensify ahead of May 31st legislative and municipal elections. Please stay tuned for the details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Veronique Joy.
Glad to have you join us. This edition of Newslink begins in Senegal as consultations for a national dialogue begin today in Dakar. Leading the first phase of talks are former prime ministers and former finance ministers of the Republic. Initially planned as a broad national gathering bringing together political parties, civil society and social actors, the format has now been reshaped because of the approaching Tabaski celebration, a period of intense religious and family activity across the country. Francis Boniface has more in this report.
The major dialogue session, earlier scheduled for May 28, will no longer be held in its traditional form. Instead, authorities have opted for targeted consultations and smaller meetings running from today, May 21, to Sunday, May 31, 2026. According to the presidency, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye is prioritizing more direct exchanges with political stakeholders, civil society representatives, and religious leaders, while taking into account the social realities surrounding Tabaski. But despite the revised format, officials insist the objective remains the same: to sustain discussions on national priorities such as governance reforms, political stability, and social cohesion. However, the consultations are already facing resistance. The Alliance for the Republic, the party of former President Macky Sall, alongside the opposition coalition Front for the Defense of the Republic, has announced a boycott of the process. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko and members of his government are expected before the National Assembly tomorrow, Friday, for another question and answer session with lawmakers on current national issues.
That was Francis Boniface with that report. In Benin, outgoing President Patrice Talon has delivered a farewell message to the nation ending his 10-year stay in office. Addressing citizens today, Talon thanked the Beninese people for what he described as a decade of bold reforms, infrastructure projects, and efforts to modernize the state. While Talon's administration earned praise from international partners for economic reforms and development projects, critics and opposition groups continued to challenge aspects of his governance. These include recent constitutional changes and the exclusion of key opposition figures from the presidential race. Talon's statement comes ahead of Sunday's transfer of power to his successor Romuald Wadani, who was elected in the first phase of the presidential elections. According to the Constitutional Court, Wadani secured more than 94% of the vote and will officially take his oath of office on May 24th. In Guinea, electoral campaign is gradually intensifying across the country ahead of legislative and municipal elections scheduled for May 31st, 2026. With just days left before the polls, candidates from the presidential coalition, independent and part of the opposition, are making numerous promises regarding youth employment, sanitation, and local development. However, this election is taking place in a unique context marked by the absence of the main opposition parties, some of which have been suspended by the administration. In contrast, others have chosen to boycott the elections. Imo editors more in this report filed by our Conakry correspondent Cherno Alpha Ibrahima Balde.
In Matam, the electoral campaign is gradually gaining momentum, even though popular enthusiasm remains limited in several neighborhoods. Between posters, caravans, and meetings with citizens, candidates are continuing their efforts to persuade voters. Dr. Hassan Ba, the presidential coalition's candidate in the legislative election, says he places health and education for all at the heart of his platform.
Today, thanks to this universal health coverage, our parents will be able to benefit from quality care throughout the country.
However, Sinkun Kaba, an independent candidate in the municipal elections in the Matam district, promises local governance, focus on transparency, sanitation, and improving the living conditions of the population.
You know, in Karires, we have a problem with water supply. In Hamakonan, there is no basic infrastructure. So we came to present our vision, our program, this responsible governance that we intend to implement to provide useful infrastructure to these communities and once again to strengthen their capacity.
Despite these various promises, some citizens remain skeptical of the candidates' speeches. In Dixon, Sori Dumbuya says he is not convinced by the projects presented during this campaign.
This isn't an election campaign, it's propaganda. ZMD is sponsoring all the candidates, and these are candidates unknown to the Guinean people. We don't see any debate on television. We don't see any debate on social media. Debate is completely absent. We haven't seen any serious candidates. We haven't seen any candidates chosen by the people of Guinea. That's deplorable.
The double legislative and municipal election scheduled for May 31, 2026 is taking place without the participation of the main opposition parties. Some parties were suspended by the ruling administration, while others have decided to boycott the electoral process for various reasons.
A report by our Conakry correspondent Cherno Alpha Ibrahima Balde, presented by Emo Edit. Elsewhere in the Gambia, the 87th Ordinary Public Session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights concludes in the capital, Banjul. It follows 10 days of high-level deliberations aimed at reinforcing the protection of human rights across the continent. Held from May 11th to 20th, the event marked the 45th anniversary of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. From Banjul, Sangdonald Mendy reports.
The discussions highlight the Commission's core mandate, which includes promotional and fact-finding missions, urgent appeals, and investigations into alleged human rights violations in member states. Delegates also examined periodic state reports submitted under Article 62 of the Charter. The Gambia Solicitor General, Hussein Tomasi, applauds the conduct of the session, stressing the need for sustained dialogue, cooperation, and shared responsibility in tackling Africa's evolving human rights concerns.
We commend the efforts of state parties in strengthening legal and institutional frameworks aimed at protecting fundamental rights and freedoms, including measures to combat violence against women and children.
Deliberations throughout the 10-day meeting focused on both progress made and challenges confronting African states in promotion of human rights and consolidation of democratic governance. Tomasi further cautioned that the post-Second World War global human rights architecture is under growing strain, citing escalating armed conflicts, insecurity, and humanitarian crises in various parts of the world.
The global human rights order established in the aftermath of the Second World War faces increasing strain. Armed conflicts, insecurity, and humanitarian crises in different parts of the world continue to inflict immense suffering on civilian populations and place significant pressure on international institutions' norms.
Established under Article 30 of the African Charter and Human and People's Rights, the African Commissions serve as the African Union's principal human rights institution mandated to promote and protect fundamental rights across the continent. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Sangdona Mendy reporting from Banjul.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Now to Sierra Leone, and the government has received the first batch of African nationals deported from the United States. 9 deportees arrived at the Freetown International Airport on Wednesday, fewer than the 25 individuals initially expected in the first group. Sierra Leone becomes the second West African nation after Ghana to accept African nationals deported under a new deportation arrangement with the U.S. The development has sparked debate within the country, with civil society groups and human rights activists raising concerns over the government's decision. Augustine Coley has more.
The Sierra Leonean government says the agreement to receive deportees was not a political trade-off, but a humanitarian decision aimed at supporting ECOWAS citizens being held in detention in the United States. Foreign Affairs Minister Timothy Musa Kaba explains that the country's involvement reflects what the government sees as both a moral responsibility and a commitment to international law.
This particular agreement is not a direct quid pro quo. It is, in a way, considering the constraint of an important bilateral partner and the need on we own part as well for play we own role in the safety of ECOWAS citizens who could be kept in detention in the United States because they may not have the fiat or the diplomatic go-ahead for taking people here, going into the countries of origin. They will be in detention. If we provide a quick reaction on a transitory basis, I think that under international law is an obligation that is performed with a high sense of morality.
However, human rights organizations in the country accuse the government of not holding consultations with citizens regarding the decision to accept deportees from the United States. Some are raising questions about what benefits the country stands to gain from the agreement, including the identities and criminal records of the deportees. This development comes amid growing cooperation between the United States and some African governments on migration and deportation issues. Earlier this year, Ghana became the first country in West Africa to accept more than 30 deported foreign nationals from the United States after signing a similar agreement. The move is already raising wider concerns across the region about migration policy, regional solidarity, and the responsibility of West African states towards displaced or detained African nationals abroad.
Augustine Coley filed that report. Meanwhile, neighboring Liberia is hosting Africa's leading state auditors and governance experts to strengthen transparency, accountability, and financial oversight across the continent. The gathering marks the 2026 strategic review meeting of the African Organization of English-Speaking Supreme Audit Institutions, bringing together 26 Auditor Generals from across Africa. The summit officially opened on Wednesday in Monrovia, following the conclusion of the 22nd Governing Board meeting earlier this week. WADR's Monrovia correspondent Abraham Parker reports.
Opening the summit, Liberian President Joseph Boakai declared that sustainable development and effective governance cannot be achieved without credible oversight institutions capable of holding public institutions accountable. President Boakai said strengthening transparency and accountability remains central to his administration's governance agenda.
We are confident that these engagements will lead to meaningful resolutions, strengthen regional audit cooperation, enhance peer support mechanisms, reinforce the independence of supreme audit institutions, improve oversight of public resources, and contribute to the broader aspirations. Liberia's hosting this conference was special historical and national significance.
Also addressing delegates, Nancy Katonko, Afrosa chairperson, notes that stronger collaboration among supreme audit institutions is essential in responding to increasingly complex financial management issues facing governments across the continent.
Public borrowing plays an important role in financing development priorities, infrastructure, and economic recovery. However, rising debt levels heighten the importance of transparency, accountability, and effective oversight. Supreme audit institutions, therefore, have a critical responsibility to provide assurance on how public debt is managed.
The ongoing strategic review meeting includes technical discussions, policy engagements, and strategic planning sessions focused on the future of public sector auditing among English-speaking African nations. Former Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf presented a lecture series. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
And just before the break, let's take you to Nigeria, where the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, NDLEA, has dismantled a major transnational drug trafficking network involving Nigerian and Mexican collaborators. The operation led to the seizure of illicit drugs and chemical substances valued at more than 480 billion naira, equivalent to around $350 million. Authorities have described the crackdown as one of the biggest anti-drug breakthroughs in Nigeria's history. WDR's correspondent Yechenu Sasitu filed this report.
The NDLEA says months of intelligence gathering led to the discovery of the largest clandestine methamphetamine laboratory ever uncovered in Nigeria. Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, Mohammed Buba Marwa, explains that operatives recovered more than 2,000 kilograms of methamphetamine and precursor chemicals during coordinated raids in Ogun and Lagos State.
Our primary target was a remote and desolate farm located at Abidigba Forest in Ijebu East local government area of Ogun State. This farm was being used as the massive, highly dangerous clandestine laboratory for methamphetamine production. Another tactical team closed in on the mastermind's luxury fortress at number 8 Dakar Balewa Street, Gulf Estate, Lakowe, Lekki area of Lagos State, the residence of the drug baron.
The agency also confirms the arrest of 10 suspects, including 3 Mexican nationals who arrived in Nigeria to manufacture the illicit substances. The operation highlights the growing sophistication of transnational drug trafficking networks and the increasing security threats linked to narcotics production in West Africa. The NDLEA says investigations are continuing as authorities intensify efforts to dismantle other criminal networks operating across the country. For WADR, Yechenu Sasitu in Abuja.
You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and on YouTube and Facebook. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Senegal holds consultations for national dialogue on key national issues in the country. Ebola death toll hits 100 in DR Congo as authorities seek global support to contain the outbreak. Nigeria busts a major international drug trafficking network and recovers over $300 million worth of illicit substances. In Guinea, electoral campaigns intensify ahead of the May 31st legislative and municipal elections. Still ahead in the news, we have the press review, guest interview, and sports news. Stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Thank you for staying with us. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, authorities are struggling to contain a renewed Ebola outbreak that continues to claim lives. Just 2 weeks after the virus surfaced, the death toll has climbed to over 130, prompting the World Health Organization to classify the situation as a public health emergency of international concern. And now it's time for our press review with Nadede Tete.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country. This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
Greetings, welcome to the newspaper review segment. We'll start off with the Daily Graphic newspaper front page. Suspend hostel fee hikes now. Rent Commissioner directs tertiary school operators. And while the Rent Commissioner has been at this for a while, recently he was on a tour of some of the hostel facilities of the major universities in the country, and there are concerns about the pricing. So currently they've been asked to put the fee increment on hold for further conversations on the matter. Other stories here: transplantation best treatment for kidney failure, that's according to a researcher, and policy rate stays at 14%. The Ghanaian Times newspaper: clamp down on rent disputes begins as Rent Control Department introduces new policy. That's what I mentioned earlier. Also here: grant clemency to death row inmates. Amnesty International appeals the President Mahama. The President is set to grant amnesty to some prisoners on Republic Day, so the advocacy has begun. Now to the Daily Guide newspaper front page. We are gearing to govern Bawumia to MPs. He was speaking to some members of parliament of the New Patriotic Party. The Chronicle newspaper: policy rate at 14%. Middle East crisis is the elephant in the room. BOG boss Dr. Johnson Pandit Isiama says. Also here: defilement law catches JHS school administrator remanded for allegedly having sex with a 14-year-old JHS graduate. And Customs Commissioner strategizes on how to boost national revenue. Final paper: The Dispatch: Ghana exits IMF after 17th bailout. But will it go for an 18th bailout? That's a question being asked. And NDC to name headquarters after late President Jerry John Rawlings. And finally, demand data behind every government claim. Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, the NPP flag bearer, tells NPP MPs. That'll be it for the newspaper review segment. It's back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Nadide Tete, for the newspaper review.
Politics, analyses on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
As reported yesterday in our news broadcast, yesterday Wednesday, the Senegalese Truckers Union is urging drivers to temporarily avoid traveling to Mali over growing security concerns along the Dakar-Bamako corridor. The armed group Jenim, which operates in Mali, has intensified attacks on trucks leading to Bamako since April, with several Senegalese trucks reportedly burnt in recent weeks. The union is also appealing to Senegalese authorities to assist drivers currently stranded in Mali, many of whom are too afraid to make the return back to Dakar. To discuss this further, WADR spoke to Gora Kuma, Secretary General of the Senegalese Truckers Union.
The reason I made this statement is because our trucks are being burned. Those carrying out the attacks are not sparing Malian trucks or trucks from other countries. That is why I'm saying that those already on Malian territory should stay where they are and avoid moving around. Senegalese drivers should remain where they are until the situation becomes clearer. If they have the possibility of returning to Senegal, they should do so. But Senegalese drivers should not decide to continue going to Bamako because the risk remains permanent. Those still in Senegal should also avoid traveling to Mali until the situation improves. It is purely a security measure.
Well, you say the risk is permanent. What exactly is the risk?
How many Malian vehicles have they burned? Passenger buses, heavy trucks, fuel tankers. 11 Senegalese trucks have been burned since the attack near Kati. Today, they burn trucks. Tomorrow, they may kill people. That is the danger. Senegal is not specifically being targeted, but there is no guarantee. They are destroying our equipment now, but tomorrow it could become something worse. That is why I say insecurity is real. As a precaution, our compatriots should remain where they are. We do not know who is carrying out these attacks. They do not announce themselves or give warnings. So, people must stay where they are for their own safety.
Are you worried that some Senegalese transport workers may ignore your call?
Of course, some may not listen, but if they ignore the warning, they will face the consequences themselves. I have already called on everyone not to travel. Those who refuse to listen will probably be very few, and if they later face problems, I cannot blame anyone except them.
What impact could this have on Mali, considering that most of the country's imported goods pass through the port of Dakar?
Our wish is for peace to return so that we can continue supplying Mali. If Mali faces difficulties, Senegal will also feel the impact. If trucks stop moving, the port could also face problems. The transport sector will suffer financial losses as well. Since the attacks began, transport activity has slowed significantly because Senegalese drivers are afraid. And if activity slows, our economy also suffers. This affects both us and the state. We want peace to return so we can continue supplying Mali, not only for Mali's benefit, but also for our own interests. Mali is an important source of business for the transport sector.
You're asking Senegalese drivers to wait until the situation becomes calm. In your opinion, what needs to happen for the Dakar-Bamako route to become safe again?
I honestly do not know. Maybe there needs to be a dialogue or negotiations. I am not a politician, but conflict usually ends around the negotiation table. Both sides need to discuss so that peace can return to Mali, because endless conflict makes no sense. We pray for peace to return because it is in the interest of both Senegalese and Malians.
What role do you think the Senegalese government can play alongside the Malian government to help resolve the situation?
What I would ask from Senegalese government first is to help the Senegalese drivers stranded in Mali who have lost everything. Right now, we are collecting money among ourselves to help them buy rice and survive. The government should step in to support those Senegalese citizens because they no longer have anything left. For the rest, discussions between the two governments may eventually help address the situation.
That was the guest interview segment. And now in the world of sports, to know what is happening, I am joined in the studio by Sankule Janko. Good afternoon, Sankule.
Yes, good afternoon, very good day.
Tell us, Sankule, what is happening currently in the world of sports?
Yes, let's begin with basketball, because in basketball qualifiers for the FIBA Women's Under-18 AfroBasket 2026 will begin across Africa later this month. Ahead of the finals in Cote d'Ivoire, several regional tournaments are scheduled in Equatorial Guinea, Uganda, Tunisia, Burkina Faso, Botswana, and Madagascar.
Well, Sankule, we've seen that countries in Africa have started announcing their squad for the World Cup. Tell us more about this.
Yes, but before we get to that, Veronique, you are aware that there is African Under-17 Africa Cup of Nations. I'm not sure if you're fluent, but there are very interesting football matches. I know you love football, but I'm not sure if you watch Under-17 games. Anyway, we begin with the Under-17 before we come to, just like you rightly said, with the squad announcements. Senegal's Under-17 team has reached the quarterfinals of the Africa Cup of Nations in Morocco after beating Algeria 2-1. The victory also secures Senegal a place at the next FIFA Under-17 World Cup in Qatar. And talking about squad announcement, Egypt captain Mohamed Salah has been named in the country's provisional squad for the 2026 FIFA World Cup alongside Omar Marmoush and Mohamed Hassan Trezeguet. And guess what? Senegal will announce their squad today, Thursday.
Interesting. We also see that there are new champions in Europe, or there's a new champion in Europe, Aston Villa. Tell us about the game.
Yes, absolutely. Aston Villa and Veronica ended a 30-year wait for major silverware after beating Freiburg 3-0 to win the Europa League in Istanbul yesterday evening. Goals from Yuri Tillemans, Emil Buenda and Morgan Rogers sealed victories, Aston Villa's first major European title since 1982. Manager Unai Emery claimed his fifth Europa League crown as Villa completed a remarkable rise from relegation contenders to European champions.
All right, thank you very much, Sankule Janko, for the sports news. And we have come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM in Dakar. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudo Juf for their technical assistance. Do interact with us via our social media platforms, X, Instagram, and Facebook at WADR English. I am Veronique Njai. Good afternoon.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Graft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.